Hey guys, it's Black History Month, and I don't know if you guys noticed this, but that's me! Hey-ho, welcome back to the channel. I am the Pumpkinator, and today we're going to be covering a little Black history lesson. You know, some people out there, they like to think that Black history is supposed to make white people feel bad, when in actuality, it's supposed to honor the people that aren't being talked about. Black people are a lot more than just slavery. We are doctors, we're inventors, we're cowboys, giddy up, and we're politicians. And that's why today we're going to be covering March, Book 1. A graphic novel series by John Lewis, Andrew Aiden, and Nate Powell. Now I know normally I cover some gooner stuff, but today I want to go a little crazy. This is a graphic novel that covers the life of John Lewis. And if you don't know who that is, he was an American politician and civil rights activist. He led and he helped organize some of the most important moments in the civil rights movement. Some of the things that he was a part of were like the Freedom Rides, the Selma to Montgomery marches, and the March on Washington. Now, that is a very bare bones explanation of what he's done. But don't worry, we're going to get a little bit more into detail with that in this book. So without any further ado, let's dive right into March, Book 1. The issue starts with us looking off a bridge as someone's trying to talk to John. He asks John if he knows how to swim, but he says no. The man says, well, neither can I, but we might have to. As we see on the other side of the bridge, there is an army of heavily armed police and dogs waiting for them. An officer pulls out a bullhorn and he says,
"This is an unlawful assembly. Your march is not conducive to public safety. You're ordered to disperse and go back to your churches and home.
May we have a word with the major?
There is no word to be had.
May we have a word with..."
There is no word to be had. You have 2 minutes to turn around and go back to your churches.
"We should kneel and pray, Josie." They all start to kneel, and the officers say, "Troops, advance!" The officers storm the bridge and start beating on everyone. They throw tear gas and grab John. We see the trooper's shadow about to hit him, and then it cuts to black as we see our title card for issue 1. But before we move on, I wanted to let you know that was one of the first of the Selma to Montgomery marches, also known as Bloody Sunday, which if you don't know what that is, throughout the entire month of March in 1965, there were 3 protests that went from Selma, Alabama to the state's capital of Montgomery. The protest was to allow black folks the right to vote. Well, kinda. You see, the prior year, the Civil Rights Act was passed so that they couldn't be discriminated against because of their race. But southern states like Alabama, they weren't too jazzed about that, you know? So they tried doing things like implementing poll taxes or bullcrap literacy tests and more just to stop black people from voting. But I honestly think the tipping point there was the murder of Jimmy Lee Jackson in 1965. An unarmed 26-year-old activist who was beaten and shot dead for participating in a peaceful protest for voting rights in Selma. The man who shot him, James Bernard Fuller, didn't go to jail until 2010. And he was only sentenced to 6 months. But I think they let him out early because of like medical complications. Now look, I know that makes Alabama look pretty bad, right? And I mean, everything I said was pretty awful. However, there has been some progress, just the tiniest bit. I mean, they just elected Shomari Figures, their first black House rep since the 1800s. And he used to work with Obama. And I basically added him to the video just so I could basically say, I see you, brother. Fight that good fight. Also, my bestest buddy is from Alabama and he's pretty chill. So we then cut to Washington, D.C. on January 20th, 2009. We explore the inside of a quaint little home, and when we get to the bedroom, we see the alarm clock going off. The radio DJ says,
"Know about that, but I do know one thing. It is cold outside in the capital city. Have you felt it, folks? If you didn't bring your hat, your mittens, your scarf, and your hot chocolate, you're just not gonna make it too long out there, baby. You know what?"
He gets up and he turns on his television where the newscaster says, "And this is it, the big day. It's a uniquely American day. Today, we reaffirm our commitment to democracy by bearing witness to the peaceful transfer of power. President-elect Barack Obama will take the oath of office." John enters his bathroom and he starts singing a little tune. "You can take my freedom away. You can take my freedom away. You can take my freedom away, but you cannot take my dignity." All right, let's see what we got. We then cut to the Cannon House office building. We can see a few people walking into the office and a guy delivers something that I'm assuming is mail. John comes in and he overhears a conversation. The one talking is Rosa Parks. And if you don't know who Rosa Parks is, then go back to middle school. Come on, dog. And she's like, "Bob," which is John's childhood nickname. And he says, "Hello, Rosa. How are you?" "Baby brother, you look cold. Where's your hat? Your scarf?" "I'm fine. I'll be okay. You two have your tickets? Andrew will take you in a few minutes to..." But then there's a knock on the door. "Come in." "Hi, are you open? We're from Atlanta, and we've come to the inauguration. I was bringing my boys here so they could see John Lewis's office." Of course. "Come on in. Can I get you something to drink? Coke? Maybe some water?" You're John Lewis." "Yes." Look, if I was lucky enough to meet John Lewis when he was still around, I'd probably be acting the same way. She continues to say, I'm sorry to disturb you. We just Congressman Lewis, these are my 2 sons, Jacob and Esau. Hello, it's very nice to meet you. I'm John Lewis. Would you like to see my office? He opens the door to his office and the mother says, Congressman Lewis, I can't believe you're here. We stopped by because I wanted my boys to see their history. I wanted them to know how far we've come. This is my office, where I do most of my work here in Washington. Sorry it's a little junky. Yeah, shh. Let me point out a few things. Here I am when I was 23 years old, meeting with President Kennedy. And this one was taken on August 28th, 1963, at the March on Washington, where Dr. King gave his I Have a Dream speech. I was the 6th speaker that day, and Dr. King spoke 10th. Of everyone who spoke at that march, I'm the only one who's still around. The boy raises his hand. Jez, why do you have so many chickens? Well, that's a good question. As a child, my parents gave me the responsibilities of taking care of our family chickens. We lived on a 110-acre cotton, corn, and peanut fields in a little quarter of Pikes County, Alabama. My father bought it in the spring of 1940 for $300? $300 for that much land, bro? I can't even get a goddamn apartment for that much. It was every penny my father had to his name. Money earned by tenant farming. My father was a sharecropper. I never had any feelings about the other animals on our farm, but I was always drawn to the chickens. I never took the chickens straight to the yard to feed them. I felt the need to talk to them first. Chickies? No one else could tell those chickens apart, and no one else cared to. There were Rhode Island Reds, Dominiques, and Bantams. I knew every one of them by appearance and personality. They were each individuals to me. Some of them I even named. Big Belle, for instance. She fell down a well. It took us 5 days to get her out. We finally put some bird crumbs in a basket and lowered it down. Darned if she didn't climb right into that basket. Then there's little Pullet, my favorite. She lived longer than any other bird I had. Everywhere I went around the yard, little Pullet would be right there behind me. Springtime was my favorite time of the year because it was the only season we could get baby chicks. When the hens began laying their eggs, I'd mark each one with a lightly penciled number to help keep track of its progress during the 3 weeks it takes to hatch. The numbers were always odd, never even. I have been told never to put an even number under a setting hen. It was bad luck, and I would cheat on those setting hens. I'd take a few from the hens that were setting a large number of eggs and slip them under the hens that weren't. This cut down on the number of bad eggs. I also learned that a hen will continue to set as long as she has eggs underneath her. So by slipping more eggs under my hen, I was able to keep them setting for another 3 weeks. Stretching out that process is not natural, and it takes a toll. So I built a makeshift incubator. And it worked! I always hoped to save enough money for an actual incubator, like the 1895 model advertised in the Sears Roebuck catalog. We used to call that book our wish book. $18.95 for an incubator. Let's see how much that costs now. Okay, well, the cheapest one that I could find looks like it's for $40. I fell asleep most nights dreaming about it the way other children dream about bikes and dollhouses, but I was never able to afford it. One of the boys raises their hands. If you love chicken so much, why didn't you become a chicken farmer? I suppose there are many reasons. Growing up, what I really wanted to be was a preacher. An uncle gave me a Bible for Christmas when I was 4. And yes, I do remember when I was 4. Yeah, so do I. Those were good times. I fell down the stairs. I'll never forget my mother reading aloud to me the first word in that book. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. By the time I was 5, I could read it myself, and one phrase struck me strongly, though I could not comprehend its full meaning at the time. Behold the Lamb of God, which taketh away the sin of the world. So I preached to my chickens just about every night. I would get them all into their little hen house and settle them on their roosts. They would sit quietly, bow their heads. They would shake their heads, but they never quite said amen. I imagined that they were my congregation, and me, I was a preacher. Of course, anyone can figure the dangers of making pets out of farm animals, especially chicken. You get emotionally attached to animals destined for the dinner table, you're asking for a broken heart. But I couldn't help it. More often than I liked, a grown hen or even a chick would die of more natural causes. For these birds, I'd give them a funeral. This was not child's play. I was generally grief-stricken, and the services were painstakingly precise. I would gather whichever of my sisters and brothers and cousins I could, and hold a eulogy. My parents would watch the newest tiny coffin join the new row of small dirt mound graves, and wonder what kind of son they had. Honestly, if you ask me, that's a good kid. I mean, come on. That guy's got heart. I even went through a period of performing baptisms. I was truly intent on saving the birds' souls. On one occasion, though, I was too intense. I guess I misjudged the time. Oh, no, he drowned the chicken? Oh, no, he survived, oh, thank God. All these aspects of my chicken play tickled my parents at first, but their amusement vanished as I began seriously protesting their own treatment of the birds. From time to time, they would have no cash to pay the Rolling Stone man for some sorely needed sugar or flour, so they would offer a bird and barter instead. One of my chickens! I'd cry, refuse to speak to them for the rest of the day. Even skip that evening meal. Worse though, Worse though was watching my parents kill one of the chickens for a special Sunday dinner. They would either break its neck or chop his head off. I was nowhere to be seen during those family meals. They would drain the blood from its body and dip it in boiling water, scalding it to loosen the feathers and plucking it. So you stopped raising chickens because it was too hard to see them killed? No, the death of the chickens was just a part of life. But eventually, I began spending more time doing schoolwork, studying, and my eyes began to open to the world around me. But why did you need to study more? Did you fail your tests? Jacob! What? What? I did okay, I wasn't the best. But school was important to me, and it was ultimately the reason I got involved in the civil rights movement. The thing is, when I was young, there wasn't much of a civil rights movement. I wanted to work at something, but growing up in rural Alabama, my parents knew it could be dangerous to make any waves. Stay out of trouble. Don't get in white people's way. But other members of my families helped open my eyes. In the summer of 1951, I took my first trip to the north. Otis Carter, one of my uncles, arranged the journey. He planned it completely for my sake. He lived in Dothan, about 60 miles south of us, where he was a teacher and a school principal. Uncle Otis has always taken a special interest in me, especially as I began to grow and stand out a bit. Not just my devotion to my schoolwork, but with the way I generally acted. I was so serious, very earnest, and still sermonizing my chickens. Still protesting when the white meat hit the table. I wore a tie often, and some of the grown-ups teased me about that, telling me I dressed like a preacher. And I know that my Uncle Otis saw something in me that I hadn't yet seen. That's why we took our trip in June of '51. There would be no restaurants for us to stop us until we were well out of the South. So we carried our restaurants right in the car with us. Stopping for gas and bathroom breaks took careful planning. Uncle Otis had made this trip before, so he knew which places along the way offered colored bathrooms, and which were just safer to just pass on by. Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky. These were the states we had to be careful in as we made our way to the north. Black drivers we passed going in the other direction, from north to south, faced an added danger, their license plates making them visible targets. Sometimes they had to face worse. What are them Yankees doing with a car like that? It wasn't until we got to Ohio I could feel my Uncle Otis relax, and so I relaxed too. By the time we reached Lake Erie and turned east towards Buffalo, I was about ready to burst with excitement, and I was not disappointed. Arriving in Buffalo after 17 hours of travel was an otherworldly experience. It was so busy, almost frantic. When we reached my Uncle OC's and Dink's house, I couldn't believe it. They had white people living next to them, on both sides. My Aunt Leola and Aunt May Charles took me shopping downtown one day in a department store called Sattler's, which is a real place, but unfortunately it's closed now. But it had a dope retro sign. There, for the first time in my life, I rode an escalator. I have never even heard of such a thing. I found my way to the candy counter, and it was like magic. I tried to make that bag of Neapolitan candy last forever. I'm sorry, I mean to laugh. It's just like, that's such old people candy, bro. Did they not have Kit Kats back then? Damn. Another time we went to the outdoor market, and I watched my Aunt Leola shop for chickens. City people didn't raise their own chickens. They did what my aunt did. I want that one. That amazed me. It was so different from back home. I wasn't even bothered by the fate of these chickens. Maybe the fact that I didn't know them had something to do with it. I don't know. I do know that I had no problem cleaning my plate that evening. But by late August, when it was time to return to Alabama, I was more than ready. I missed my brothers and my sisters. I missed my parents. When I finally arrived home, I was crying because it felt so good to be home. Thank you, Uncle Otis. After that trip, home never felt the same, and neither did I. In the fall, I started riding the bus to school, which should have been fun, but it was just another sad reminder of how different our lives were from those of white children. The county didn't bother paving roads into colored communities unless it was necessary for white traffic to pass through. Our bus itself was an old hand-me-down like our school books. I realized how old it was when we finally climbed onto the paved highway. The main road running east from Troy, and past the white children's buses, we passed our schoolhouse as well, with nice playground equipment outside. Nothing like our cluster of small cinder block buildings with a dirt field out back for recess. We drove past prison work gangs almost every day. The prisoners were always black, as were the folks working in the fields beyond them. You couldn't help but notice, despite everything that confronted me on the way to school, I was in heaven once I stepped inside. I loved going to the library. It was the first time I ever saw black newspapers and magazines like Jet, Ebony, and the Baltimore African American, or the Chicago Defender. And I'll never forget my librarian, Corrine Harvey. My dear children, read! Read everything! But sometimes going to school was a luxury my family couldn't afford. When planting and harvest season arrived, the reality of those fields displaced any dreams about the future. I pled with them to let me go. I'd explain how far behind I'd fall if I missed those days of schoolwork, but they always said, "We need you here, bub." And so I'd hide. I'd get up, eat breakfast like normal. As the others made their ways to the field for the day's work, I would slip away. "Bop! Where are you, son? Then, when I could hear the bus approaching, I'd dash out, climb on, and I'd be off. When I got home, my father would be furious. I was certain he'd tan my hide, but he never did whip me. Never for that. Never do that again. I did it again. And of course, he scolded me again. But deep inside, I think he knew there was no stopping me. This was a life decision that I had made, and it was near impossible to turn me away from it. On one May morning in 1954, near the end of my freshman year of high school, I read a headline that turned my world upside down. The U.S. Supreme Court had handed down its decision in the school desegregation case of Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka. The doctrine of separate but equal, upon which the entire institution of segregation was based on, had been ruled unconstitutional. I was so excited. Surely everything was going to change. I thought that, come fall, I'd be riding a state-of-the-art bus to a state-of-the-art school. An integrated school. Not everyone was so excited though. Don't get in trouble and don't you get in the way. My parents' attitude didn't bother me nearly as much as those among the ministers at the church, who never mentioned these injustices in their sermons. It did not escape my notice that our ministers always supported church in a very luxurious automobile. Then one Sunday morning in early 1955, I was listening to WRMA out of Montgomery when I heard a sermon by someone unknown to me, a young preacher from Atlanta. I didn't catch his name until the end.
And so thank you. And again, you just heard Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Coming up next, we got a real treat for y'all on this Sunday.
Dr. King's message hit me like a bolt of lightning. He applied the principles of the church to what was happening now, today. It was called the social gospel, and I felt like he was preaching directly to me. I went to the library on Monday to find out everything I could about this man. At the time, I could only find one newspaper article, but 1955 was a watershed year. In May, a second Supreme Court in Brown versus Board prompted segregation elected officials, like Senator James Eastland of Mississippi and Storm Thurmond of South Carolina, to swear to the death their continued defiance of the court. And these guys, if you could not tell, were not the biggest fans of people like me. Eastland once said, "I have no prejudice in my heart, but the white race is a superior race and the Negro race is an inferior race and the races must be kept separate by law." My guy clearly does not know what prejudice means. Anyway, lines have been drawn, bloods have been spilled. That August, an incident occurred which no one could ignore. In Money, Mississippi, the body of a 14-year-old Emmett Till, who was down from Chicago visiting relatives, was pulled from the bottom of the Tallahatchie River. The day before, as he left the Money County store with some friends, he said "bye baby" to the white woman behind the counter. The next day, he was dead. A black farmer named Moses Wright witnessed the two white men dragging Emmett from his relative's house and had the courage to testify against him in open court. The all-white jury found those two white defendants not guilty. A few months later, they even confessed to the murders in Look magazine. But there was nothing to be done. They had already been tried. Then, on December 1st, 1955, Rosa Parks refused to move to the back of the bus. "If you don't move, I'll be forced to call the police, and they will arrest you. And you may do just that." My family didn't know Rosa, but they knew plenty of women just like her. More than a few wives and mothers from Pikes County did domestic work in Montgomery, and she was arrested. Montgomery was just 50 miles down the road from us. Our ministers lived there. Most of my teachers are from there. So when Dr. King, as president of the Montgomery Improvement Association, led a boycott of the buses, we felt like we were part of it too. I listened to first-hand accounts of what was happening. May, they're empty. Every day they'd be full, but there's hardly a soul riding those buses now. I followed it almost every day, either in the paper or on the radio. The boycott went on for more than a year. Dr. King's example showed me it was possible to do more as a minister than what I had witnessed in my own church. I was inspired. So 5 days before my 16th birthday, I preached my first public sermon, a praying mother from the book of Samuel. I was nervous, but once I warmed up, the congregation warmed up too, and outpoured the emotions. Amen. Praise the Lord. Hallelujah. After hearing of the sermon, the Montgomery advisors asked to take my picture for an article. That was the first time I saw my name on print. We then cut back to DC in 2009. Congressman? Yes, young lady. Jacob and Esau, they play too many video games. Oh God. I'm so actually sure that he wrote this because only an old head would say something like that, right? They play too many video games, but they work hard. They're good boys. But they stop short when they hear a knock on the door. John says come in, and his receptionist says they're going to be ready in 5 minutes. The woman says, "I'm really very sorry. We've taken up so much of your time. We should get going." No, please, stay. We still have a little time. What were you going to ask? I guess, well, school. What did you do after high school? How did you go to college? Is that where you met Dr. King? Yes and no. My mother helped me go to college. My mother had a part-time job working at the White Baptist Offering Home in downtown Troy, Alabama. One day at work, she saw a little paper published by the Alabama Baptist Convention, which was all white. It mentioned a school in Nashville called the Americans Baptist Theological Seminary that was jointly supported by the white Southern Baptists and the black National Baptists. According to the article, it was a school for black men and women to study and become ministers or missionaries, and it offered a work-study program on campus. Apply here. So I applied to go to school there and was accepted. And I got a job washing dishes and serving food on the line. It wasn't glamorous, but I got to know all the faculty, students, and visitors. I mean, everybody needs to eat. I loved the new ideas college was introducing me to, in religious and philosophy, but I couldn't stop thinking about the social gospel. Here I was reading about justice, where there were brave people out there and working to make it happen. I started feeling guilty for not doing more. I became restless. I thought about Troy State, just a few miles from my parents, where no black students were allowed. So I applied as a transfer student. 1 month passed, then another, and I never heard back. Finally, I decided to introduce myself to the only person who I thought could understand what I was trying to do. Over the next several weeks, I exchanged a series of letters and phone calls with Reverend Ralph Abernathy and a lawyer named Fred Gray. Everyone knew Fred Gray. He represented Rosa Parks, and he was now Dr. King's attorney. Finally, Gray and Abernathy wrote to tell me that Dr. King wanted to meet me. One Saturday morning in spring of 1958, my father drove me to the Greyhound bus station again. Neither of us said a word. I boarded the bus and traveled the 50 miles from Troy to Montgomery. I'd never seen a lawyer before, black or white. And I presume you're John Lewis? Yes, sir. Attorney Gray? We're gonna have to drive over to the church. They load up into the car and they drive on over to the church. When they get inside, they walk down some stairs and enter a hallway. They knock on a door and they hear a voice say, "So, are you the boy from Troy? Or are you John Lewis?" I just wanted to meet the boy from Troy. Now, who's this young man who wanted to desegregate Troy? I was scared. I didn't know what to say or do. So I said my whole name. Dr. King, I am John Robert Lewis. Do you really want to go to Troy State? Yes, Dr. King, I want to go to Troy State. They questioned me about everything. Where I was from, how I was raised, if I knew what I would really face. To attend Troy State, we'll have to sue the state of Alabama and the Board of Education. You're not old enough to file a suit, so you'll have to get your parents to, okay? They're gonna have to sign. But if you want to go, we'll help. We'll raise the money to file the suits, and we'll support you all the way. But you must keep in mind, your parents could lose their job. Your family home may be bombed or burned. You may get hurt. Your family might get hurt. I don't know what will happen. You need to go back to Troy and talk it over with your family. Lewis rides back to Troy on the bus and his father picks him up. He says, "My father didn't say a word to me on the ride back from the bus station." But the next morning, they sat me down for questioning, asking me what happened the previous day. And I told them. At first, they wanted to be supportive, but they were afraid, not just for themselves, but for those around us, our friends and neighbors. They said they didn't want anything to do with filing a suit against the state of Alabama. Nothing, not one thing. I was heartbroken, but it was their decision. I wrote Dr. King a letter explaining that I would be returning to Nashville in the fall. Looking back, it must have been the spirit of history taking hold of me. Because in Nashville, I'd meet people who'd open my eyes to a sense of values that would forever dominate my moral philosophy. The way of peace, the way of love, the way of nonviolence. Come in, sir, it's time. Thank you. Congressman Lewis, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. You have no idea what this means to me. And thank you, John Lewis. Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Anytime. You're welcome. The family leaves and the Lewis meets up with the other icons. He goes up to Rosa and he thanks her for waiting. He asks her how she is and she's like, "I'm good, Bob. Are you ready?" "I'm ready. Congressman, before you go, there was a letter for you. It's from Jim Lawson." We then cut to March 26, 1958. I was attending my first Baptist church in downtown Nashville. You could literally stand on the steps, throw a baseball, and hit the steps of the Tennessee State Capitol. A young man will be joining us this evening, if you're interested. He'll be conducting a workshop of nonviolence here at First Baptist. His name is Jim Lawson. The congregation, led by Kelly Miller Smith, were black Baptists who left the white church because they had been forced to worship in the balcony. I was one of the first volunteers to attend. It wasn't a very large meeting. I was the only student to go from my little school. There were young people like Diane Nash from Fisk University. And Diane Nash, she's pretty freaking dope. We love black women that stands up for what's right. And she's still alive to this day. She was the leader of the student wing of the civil rights movement. She was also a freedom rider, but I am so sure that they'll get to that in just a second because John Lewis was also a freedom rider. Others came from Meharry Medical College and Tennessee State. At the time, Jim Lawson was a graduate student in the Divinity School at Vanderbilt. He also represented an organization called the Fellowship of Reconciliation, better known as the FOR, or FOR, a pacifist group committed to the philosophy and discipline of nonviolence. FOR had also published a popular comic book called Martin Luther King and the Montgomery Story, which explained the basics of passive resistance and nonviolent actions as tools for desegregation. I wanted to start working with young people, with students, high school and college students. Jim talked about the Montgomery bus boycotts, about war resistance, about nonviolence. He spoke of Gandhi, This little brown man from India using the way of nonviolence to free an entire nation of people. And how we could apply nonviolence, just as Dr. King did in Montgomery, all across America, South and North, to eradicate some of the evils that we already face. The evils of racism, the evils of poverty, the evils of war. Jim Lawson conveyed the urgencies of developing our philosophy, our discipline, our understanding. His words liberated me. I thought, this is the way out. I told my classmates, I told two of my closest friends, Bernard Lafayette and James Bevel. I told everyone that they should come to the workshop. A few days later, we had another nonviolence workshop, this time with ministers and students from a number of different schools nearby. Bernard Lafayette was one of the first people to attend with me. They called us names over and over. You son of a bitch, I'm not saying that, bro. In time, everyone played the roles of protesters, the instigators, and the resistance. There may be a black person playing the role of a white person, or vice versa. We each tried to do everything we could to test ourselves, to break each other's spirits. We tried to dehumanize each other, but sometimes I couldn't help but smile, even laugh, when some people played such an unnatural role. But sometimes it was one of your friends calling you names, knocking you down, spitting on you. You okay, Charles? I don't think I can do this. I just can't. Maybe I can bring signs or make them. Maybe I can drive people to the site, but I can't do this. I cannot be nonviolent. For some, it's too much. But we need to see how each of us would react under stress. Lawson taught us how to protect ourselves, how to disarm our attackers by connecting with their humanity, maintain eye contact, how to protect each other, how to survive. But the hardest part to learn, to truly understand deep in our hearts, was how to find love for your attacker. Do not let them shake your faith in nonviolence. Love them. We took a name, the Nashville Student Movement. Because of our distrust of centralized power, we insisted on rotating leadership. We were all in this together, and we were ready to act. Segregation of the downtown stores bothered us the most. We could shop there and pay the same prices as white customers, but we couldn't use dressing rooms or sit at the lunch counters to eat. It was humiliating. So we decided the department store lunch counters would be our first target. November 28th, 1959. We started with test sit-ins to test the local store's policies, establishing that they would not serve interracial or all-black group. Our plan was simple. We entered a store, we asked to be served, and if or when we were refused, we'd leave. I was nervous. We were all nervous. Each purchasing something, establishing us as legitimate paying customers, and then sat down at the lunch counter for a bite to eat. I'm sorry, we can't serve you here. May we speak to the manager? Part of our discipline was that only one person spoke for the group in inaction. On this day, we designated Diane. I'm the manager. Look, it's store policy not to serve colored people here. What about the white students? Can they be served? No, I'm sorry. They're with you, so we can't serve them either. Thank you. No harsh words, no violence. No one even paid much attention as we left. When news of the student-led campaign spread, words of encouragement and support flowed in from around the country. We decided to stage our second test sit-in the following Saturday, December 5th. Hold up, we don't serve colored people here. This time I think they were expecting us. May I speak to the manager, please? I'm sorry, it's store policy not to serve Negroes. Thank you. And so, again, we left without incident. In January, following the winter break from school, our weekly workshop numbers swelled. We were close to ready, though no specific date had yet been set for our first sit-in. As fate or the spirit of history would have it, someone else made the move for us. On Monday, February 1st, 1960, in Greensboro, North Carolina, 4 freshmen from North Carolina took seats at the downtown Woolworth's lunch counter. One of them had read the Forrest comic about Dr. King in Montgomery, which got them talking about nonviolent actions. The next day, 19 students, black and white, had joined the original 4 at Woolworth. By Wednesday, the number swelled to 85, and similar sit-ins have formed in Raleigh and Durham. A young North Carolina minister, Douglas Moore, who was a friend of Jim Lawson and called to encourage us. They've been preparing. That's right. We've had 2. They're nearly ready. On February 7th, 1 week after Greensboro's sit-in, we began ours. Cutting back to Washington, D.C. at 8:57 a.m., January 20th, 2009. Okay, I've got to go. Do you have everything? I think we're all set. Bob, are you going to be warm enough? It was 19 degrees on our car's thermometer, and it's not even supposed to be above freezing today. Do you have a scarf? Gloves? I have gloves, and I think I have a hat somewhere. Ah, here it is. Oh, you can't wear that. Why not? People need to see you. They need to see your face. Do you have a scarf? Maybe a different hat? No. Here, Congressman, use this one. There, Bob, wear that. I can't take this young man's scarf. What's he gonna wear? I'm gonna be inside. I won't need it, sir. Seriously, take it. Thank you, brother. Okay, I'm going to wear the scarf, and I appreciate it. But you all really don't have to go through all this trouble. There was half a foot of snow on the ground in Nashville the day we first sat in, and I survived that. Cutting back to February 7th, 1960. That'll be 10 cents. Thank you. Oh my God. Here comes the... Ma'am, may we be served? We don't serve here. We sat in the eerie quiet for several hours. Is everything okay? Fine, John. A little hard to read in the dark, but we're getting enough through the windows to make do. Eventually, the calm was broken. What the hell is this? Go home. What are y'all even doing here? Get out of here, y'all don't belong. But after a while, they wore themselves out and left. At about 6 that evening, word came that it was about time to go. When we got back to First Baptist Church, it was like New Year's. The other teams at Crest and McKellen's had been just as successful. That waitress was so scared and so nervous, she didn't know what to do. Her hands were shaking and she started dropping dishes right on the floor. You wouldn't believe it, Diane. We went to use the ladies' rooms. Negroes everywhere! Our numbers swelled to over 200 students for our next sit-in on Thursday, February 18th. And again, the counter was closed. That afternoon, we stayed for hours without incident. 2 days later, we marched again. And people were starting to notice. Go home! You're not welcomed! Go back to Africa! That night, Jim Lawson asked to meet with the Central Committee. The store owners are asking for a moratorium on the sit-ins. They say they need some time to put together a proposal. So, we agreed to wait. By the end of the week, we had heard nothing. So we decided that Saturday we would sit in again. Our numbers were multiplying so fast that hundreds of volunteers had not yet been trained in the ways of nonviolence. So I wrote up a basic list of do's and don'ts to distribute. On the morning of February 27th, 1960, we gathered to hear Will Campbell, a white minister who'd been run out of Oxford, Mississippi for playing ping pong with a black man, which is crazy. We'd gotten word from Nashville's chief of police that anyone involved in further protests would be arrested. There were also rumors of planned attacks by young whites, which the police did not intend to stop. So on this particular morning, Will Campbell had come to tell us what he had heard from his contacts in the white community. If you attempt to sit in, the business community, the local officials, and the authorities will all pull back. They will let the police and the rough elements in the white community come into the stores and beat you. But it's your decision. We knew we couldn't let the threat of violence stop us. We were going to sit in. My group targeted Woolworths. Go home! No sooner did we take our seats at the upstairs counter than some young man began attacking the group downstairs. We immediately went downstairs to join our brothers and sisters. Then, the white folks attacked the protesters. They beat them and ripped them from the counters. Violence begets violence, but the opposite is just as true. Fury spends itself pretty quickly when there's no fury facing it. The beating subsided. The group at Crest faced humiliation. At McKellen's, Paul Lappert drew particular attention for being white. The police, conspicuously absent while we were beaten, arrived quickly after the mob wore themselves out. If you do not move from your seats and leave this establishment, you will be placed under arrest. And we didn't. I wasn't afraid. I felt free, liberated, like I crossed over. We wanted to change America, to make it something different, something better. There were so many of us to arrest that they drove us off to jail. We filled every paddy wagon the police had in Nashville. February 27th, 1960 was my first arrest. The first of many. We were jubilant as we filled the jail cells. Surrounded by so many of our friends, we felt like prisoners in a holy war. Back at the lunch counters, police could hardly keep up with the waves of students quickly filling the empty seats. No sooner would one group be arrested than another one take its place. 82 of us went to jail that night. The police wanted nothing more than to be rid of us. So they reduced the bail from $100 to $5 a piece. But it didn't matter. We weren't about to cooperate in any way with the system allowing the very discrimination we were protesting. It didn't take Nashville's powers that be long to realize it was impossible to force us to pay our way out. Around 11 p.m., we were all released. That Sunday morning, Fisk University President Dr. Stephen J. Wright addressed more than 1,000 students jammed into the university chapel. To the students who took part in yesterday's actions, I say to you, I stand with you. Nashville stands with you. Dr. Wright was the first black college president in the country to take such a stand, and we were euphoric. The next day, we all went to court. 3 amazing lawyers came to our defense, refusing to charge a dime. Z. Alexander Luby, an older man from the West Indies, was our lead attorney, and the first black man on council in 40 years. He also worked with Thurgood Marshall. First off, y'all should know we're going to be trying the defense in groups of half a dozen or so. Your Honor, I object. Overruled. Your Honor, I must make a formal motion that the defendants be tried individually. They do have rights to a fair trial. Motion denied. So the trial proceeded. These young people were not disturbing the peace. Far from it. They were peaceful customers, fully compliant with the law, who were harassed and beaten. Oh my God, what's the use? Having heard all the evidence presented before me today, I find the defendants guilty and order them to pay a fine of $50 each or serve 30 days in the county workhouse. Your Honor, we feel that paying these fines we would be contributing to and supporting the injustice and immoral practices that we have been performed in the arrest and conviction of the defendant. Thank you. Jail, no bail! Jail, no bail! When the city followed through with its workhouse routine, it prompted outrage from all over the country. Telegrams of support arrived from Ralph Bunche, Eleanor Roosevelt, and Harry Belafonte. At the same time, more students volunteered and the sit-ins continued. Much like Nashville itself, Mayor Ben West had a relatively progressive reputation on race. It did not, however, necessarily mean he was willing to risk his job and reputation to help. But on March 3rd, Mayor West ordered our release. We left the jail with a sense of triumph, and West also formed a biracial committee to study segregation in the city. In return, he asked us to temporarily halt our sit-ins while the community worked, and we agreed. That same day, the chancellor and trustees of Vanderbilt University ordered the dean of the Divinity School to dismiss Jim Lawson. Cut off the head, the thinking went, and the body would fall. But for Vanderbilt, things didn't work out as planned. Instead, dozens of faculty and staff threatened to resign in protest, making national headlines. By the end of the month, we decided we've waited long enough. So Friday, the 25th, more than 100 of us marched from First Baptist Church to 9 downtown stores. There were no arrests that day, but after Tennessee Governor Buford Ellington saw footage of the day's protests on the national news, he was irate. These sit-ins are instigated by and staged for the convenience of the Columbia broadcast system. Why does that sound awfully familiar? Quietly, almost invisibly, within the churches, the black community boycotted of all downtown stores began, what some people call a selective buying campaign. Kind of like what we're doing today with Target and Walmart. Did you know that Walmart is one of the U.S.'s biggest employers, but most of their employees are on government relief programs like food stamps and Medicaid because they aren't being paid enough for basic necessities? That alone is reason enough to never shop at Walmart again. At least for me. Also, they started boycotting Coke, and I'm kind of here for that because Pepsi's always been better in my opinion. Also, Coke never really rocked with us historically, but Pepsi, they with us. Anyway, would everyone in the congregation who has not spent money downtown please stand? Hallelujah! Sir, you're the owner of this establishment. Can you tell us what business has been like? You can roll a bowling ball down Church Street and not hit anybody. On April 5th, those empty streets brought an offer from the mayor's committee. It proposed a system of partial integration, which was the same to us as partial segregation, but it was supported by 2 black committee members, Fisk President Wright and TSU President W.S. Davis. This felt like a betrayal and was more evidence of the difference between our generations. We saw the evidence the next time Thurgood Marshall spoke at Fisk. Look, once you've been arrested, you've made your point. If someone offers you to get out, man, get out! Thurgood Marshall was a good man, but listening to him convinced me more than ever that our revolt was as much against the traditional black leadership structure as it was against segregation and discrimination. 5 days after Marshall spoke, we reassumed the sit-ins. The next weekend, Easter, a conference organized by Ella Baker of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference was held at Shaw University in Raleigh. Baker asked Jim Lawson, whose message appealed to the young people's listening, to give a keynote speech. The NAACP is too conservative. We must tap into our greatest resource, a people no longer the victims of racial evil. We can act in a disciplined manner to implement the Constitution. The weekend closed with the creation of a student-run group that would coordinate and organize the entire sit-in movement and whatever laid beyond. That organization became known as the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC. Cutting back to 2009, John says, "Okay, I'm going now. Andrew will take you to the gathering point before you go to your seats. You have everything? We'll be fine. You stay warm. You too. Let the spirit of history guide our. Let the spirit of history be our guide." As they walk away, a phone starts ringing in John's office. We then cut back to April 1960, as we see a phone ringing there as well. I was on my way out the door to our 6:30 a.m. Nashville Student Movement Central Committee meeting when the phone rang. Hello? Bernard! Bernard, we gotta go. They bombed the Luby house. Well, at 5:30 a.m., someone threw dynamite at the Luby's house from a passing car. The blast tore out the front of the house, and people are saying it shattered windows a block away. What about the Lubys? Are they okay? It looks like, miraculously, no one was injured. We can't let this intimidate us. We've got to do something, and it's got to be now. If we're going to make ourselves heard, we must dramatize the situation, and we have to stand together. Our own government can't allow this violence. We have to march. Agreed. Let's get the word out to our people and send the telegram to Mayor West. Let him know we're on our way to see him. By noon, thousands of people gathered at Tennessee State to march on City Hall. Mayor West, we are outraged at this bombing. How can you allow this sort of behavior in Nashville? It's a miracle no one was killed. Mr. Vivian, let me say, no, I'll say, this has gone too far. Look, you have the power to destroy this city. So let's not have any mob, okay? I will do everything I can to enforce the law without prejudice. but I have no power to force restaurant owners to serve people they don't want to. We are all Christians together, so let's pray together. How about eating together? Mayor West, will you use the prestige of your office to appeal to the citizens to stop racial discrimination? I appeal to all citizens to end discrimination. To have no bigotry, no bias, no hatred. Do you mean that to include lunch counters? Little lady, I stopped segregation 7 years ago at the airport when I first took office, and there's been no trouble there since. Then, Mayor, do you recommend that the lunch counters be desegregated? Yes. That's up to the store managers, of course. The next evening, Dr. King arrived to speak. Those 6 downtown Nashville stores served food to black customers for the first time in the city's history. I came to Nashville not to bring inspiration, but to gain inspiration from the great movement that had taken place in this community. No lie can live forever. Let us not despair. The universe is with us. Walk together, children. Don't be weary. And that is where book 1 ends. And I gotta say, I love it so freaking much. Now, hear me out. There are 2 more books of this, so we can continue the story if you would like to. But for me to know that you want that, you have to get this video to 60 likes, 70 likes. Get it to 70 likes. And honestly, if I had enough time, I would definitely make a Black History channel. But, I have a full-time job. So if you want me to be able to do something like that, maybe consider subscribing and check out some of my other videos. They're not Black History videos, they're comic book videos, but they're still entertaining. And I would love to hear what you guys have to say down in the comments. Cool. And I'll see you guys in the next one. And make sure you tell your family that you love them. Bye-bye now. I'll see you in the next one.